Trust in God is a very important Jewish idea, fundamental Jewish value. The question is, what does it mean? What does it exactly mean to trust in God? I want to start by describing some things it doesn't mean, and then we'll move to some of the things it does mean. And it doesn't mean just one thing. It means a few things. Some people have the following picture in their minds. God is running the world. He's all-powerful. You can't fight with him. What he wants to be done is what's going to be done. And he's running it for the best. Not only can't you fight with him, but you can't help him either. He doesn't need your help doesn't count. So really, there's no reason to do anything. Aside from mitzvahs that he commanded us to do, we should do them. But other than that, there's no necessity to do anything else. In particular, there's no reason to have a job. If God wants you to be provided for, you'll be provided for, even if you don't take a job. And if God doesn't want you to be provided for, then you won't be provided for, even if you do take a job. So you're taking a job can't make any difference. God is running the world, and the outcome will be what he wants it to be. So if he said put on tefillin, okay, then you have to put on tefillin. He said keep Shabbos, you have to keep Shabbos. But other than that, no point in doing anything. According to this, Yishtadlus is ridiculous. It's, in fact, a lack of emunah, it's a lack of trust in God, a lack of belief in God. Because if you're believing in God, then there should be nothing else to do.
If you had a 100% trust in God, I guess you wouldn't have to do Yishtadlus. But unfortunately, most of us can't say we're 100%.
Well, maybe what you're saying is right, but what you're saying is not addressing my point now. You're making a religious point. I'm making a logical point. They're trying to put forth a logical argument why Yishtadlus, effort to control your circumstances, is worthless. They're basing it on pure logic. Your remark is...
No, because it's the same way as Hashem put Teva into the world. You're supposed to Yishtadlus is part of Teva. In other words, if you don't do Yishtadlus, you won't have.
So you say, but you're not answering the argument. You know, when someone...
No, if you won't have Yishtadlus, you won't have because you didn't do your part of getting it. In other words, yes, you were...
Listen to me. You're not familiar with how argument goes. A person puts forward an argument to a conclusion. If you simply say, the conclusion's wrong, okay, that doesn't answer his argument. What we want to see is where his argument breaks down. You may be perfectly correct that the conclusion is wrong, but that doesn't explain to me where his argument breaks down. And being a philosopher and a logician, I'm interested in knowing where the argument breaks down. Now, this argument that I just gave you is similar to an argument which we used to put on graduate exams in graduate school in philosophy. And if the graduate student couldn't get this question right, we suggested that he change professions to drive a bus, but not become a doctor in philosophy. I'll show you how the same argument can be made without God at all. I'm considering tightening the brakes on my car. And someone says, don't bother. It's a total waste of time. It's a total waste of time. Why is that? See, look, either you're going to have an accident or you're not going to have an accident, right? Well, I guess so. I mean, there's no third option to get out of both of them. Either I will or I won't. Now, look, he says, if you will have an accident, then tightening the brakes is a waste of time, waste of money, because it's not going to help, because you're going to have the accident. And if you're not going to have the accident, then tightening your brakes is a waste of money, because the whole reason to tighten your brakes is to prevent an accident. And you're not going to have an accident. So either way, tightening your brakes is worthless, so you shouldn't bother tightening your brakes. It's the same argument, and it's wrong for exactly the same reason. They're both wrong, and they're wrong for a straightforward, logical reason. The logical reason is this. There's something in logic called equivocation. Equivocation means that you're going through an argument step by step, and in one step, a certain word means something, and in a later step, the same word means something else. You change the meaning of your words in the middle of the argument. That's verboten. That's off limits. You're not allowed to do that. The argument is no longer valid. And in this case, the same thing happens. Certain words change their meaning as we go along in the argument, and that's why the argument is a failure. Here's how it works. The first step was either you're going to have an accident or you aren't. And we said, that seems to be true. I mean, the future either has an accident in it or it doesn't have an accident in it. There's no third option. Great. Now the second step was, well, imagine that you're going to have an accident. Then if you're going to have an accident, there's no point in tightening the brakes because it won't help because you're going to have the accident. What do I mean now when I say you're going to have the accident? I mean something like this. You're going to have the accident no matter what else you do. I'm going to have the accident independently of anything else that happens. Is that what those words meant in the first step? In the first step it was either you're going to have an accident or you won't. Now it's, well, you're going to have the accident means you're going to have an accident no matter what else you do. Was that included in the first step? No, it was not. And in fact, if you include it in the first step, you'll see the first step is wrong. Read that back into the first step. The first step now becomes either you're going to have an accident no matter what else you do, or you're not going to have an accident no matter what else you do. That's nonsense. Whether or not you have an accident might very well depend upon what else you do. So what happened was, the words, you're going to have an accident, in the first step, which seemed so innocent, and they could have been innocent, in the second step become very bad, very wrong, and that's why it's not a good argument, because the words change their meaning between the first step and the second step. One should challenge the second step. I'm going to have an accident no matter what else I do. Why? Maybe precisely the tightening of the brakes is what will prevent the accident, and not tightening the brakes is what will cause the accident. So I have no reason to accept that. The first step didn't take that into account. That's why it was innocent. And the failure in the argument is you're changing the meanings of the words as you go down the argument, from the first step to the second step. And that, in logic, is a failure. Now let's go back and read the same solution into the argument vis-a-vis God. God's running the world. Whatever he wants to be done will be done. If he wants you to survive, you'll survive. If he wants you not to survive, you won't survive. That's true enough. After all, he's running the world. Whatever he wants is going to be done, for sure. The second step, well then, if he wants you to survive, you don't need to work, because if he wants you to survive, then he can make you survive without working. That doesn't follow. That's a much stronger thing than we said in the first step. This says, if he wants you to survive, he wants you to survive no matter what you do. That wasn't included in the first step. That's added in the second step. And here, the correct view is precisely the same as it was in the accident case. The correct view is, maybe he wants you to survive if you work. And he wants you to not survive if you don't work. What he wants is conditional. It isn't absolute, it's conditional. What he wants for you depends precisely on what you do. Once you take that into account, you see that the argument is a fallacy. In the first step, you don't take into account whether it's absolute or not. In the second step, you jump to the idea that it's absolute. That's a fallacy in logic. The argument is no good. And the argument is no good precisely because what God wants for you can depend upon what you do. Now let's explore that just a little bit. Do we have any proof that that's true, that that's the way God operates? The argument is no good because it might be that way. An argument can't tolerate it might be. That defeats it. Is it correct that what God wants for you might depend upon what you do? Do we have any proof of that? Any absolute, rock-solid Jewish proof that what God wants for you depends on what you do? Of course we do. It's one of the 13 basic principles of faith. It's a principle of Judaism that everybody knows. It's called reward and punishment. Reward and punishment is precisely that principle. It means if you do mitzvos, you'll get reward. And if you do averos, transgressions, you'll get punished. So what he wants for me depends upon what I do. Of course, whatever he wants will happen, but that doesn't cover the question, why does he want what he wants? What does he take into account when he decides what he wants for me? So that being the case, the idea that since God's running the world and he's running it for the best, there's no point in my doing anything. On the contrary, it may very well be that he wants me to have X if I do these things, and if I do other things, he wants me to have Y. So what I do, the outcome will be according to, notice the very parv, limp words that I'm using. I didn't say caused, or I didn't say it was a reason, I just said it's according to. The outcome will be according to what I do, because that's what God wants. And then what I do will be very important. Now, that's always a theoretical possibility. It's a real possibility of reward and punishment because the Jewish tradition tells us that it's so. What about things like having a job? What does the Jewish tradition say about taking control of your own circumstances? Well, the Jewish tradition is very emphatic that for almost everyone, and now I'm acknowledging the point that you made before, for almost everyone, you are responsible to take control of your circumstances as best you can. And at least in some ways, in some applications, even the very greatest of people, even the people you credited with having perfect trust in God, even they take control of their circumstances as best they can. I'll give you a few examples. Jacob hears that his brother Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men. Those 400 men were not there to roll out the red carpet. They were there to slaughter him. What does Jacob do? He does three things. He sends a great bribe and very obsequious, means low, humble message to his brother, asking for his favor and forgiveness and so forth and so on. He splits his camp to prepare for war. If in spite of his gift, Esau will make war, he splits his camp, so while he's fighting with this camp, the other camp can escape. And he prays to God. Now, the fact that he prays to God means he acknowledges that God is going to determine the outcome. That doesn't stop him from sending the bribe and preparing for war. In Jacob's mind, both are consistent and both are necessary. There's a story with Samuel the prophet. Saul is king and Saul has disobeyed God. God says to Samuel, I'm disgusted with him, I don't want him anymore. I want somebody else to be king. Go to Yishai and tell him one of his sons is going to be king, Yishai, of course, David's father. And when you get there, I'll tell you who to anoint as king. Fine. So Samuel says to God, but Saul is going to hear about this and he's going to kill me. So God says, I'm burlesquing it, God says, good point. Glad you pointed that out. Let me tell you what to do. Take an animal with you and say you're going there for a sacrifice, and don't advertise the fact that you're going to anoint one of Yishai's sons as king. And when you get there, go to Yishai and then we'll complete the project. Now, the reader might say, wait a minute, Samuel, you're telling God? You're telling God that Saul might find out and Saul might attack you? Doesn't God know that? Of course God knows that. So why don't you just let it go? Trust God that he's running the show. And here he told you to do something. He told you to do something straight. So certainly that's a case in which you should say, if he told me, then he took it into account. And he took it into account, he has the power to make it right. So I should just follow him blindly. But Samuel doesn't do that. And Samuel's not criticized for this. In other words, God says to do it, but when he says to do it, he expects Samuel to take intelligent planning how to do it well. So God says, deliver this to downtown Manhattan. Can I cross Times Square blindfolded? Because God said to do it? No, God means watch out for the traffic also, and make sure you get there safely. So here too, Samuel says, I understand it's my responsibility to do this in a safe and successful fashion. I don't know how to do it, because I see an obstacle that I can't overcome. Saul's going to find out about it, and he will kill me. And God doesn't say, well, think harder. If I told you, you should have been able to figure it out. No, God says, okay, I'll tell you what to do. I'll give you a strategy that will succeed. So here again, obviously, Samuel's being addressed by God direct. He has no worries that God isn't running the show, that God isn't capable, and so forth and so on. But he knows it's his responsibility to act, and to act in a way that he can plan it to be a success, And therefore, together with acknowledging that God is the one who's doing it, he knows that he has to act. This idea is carried out even further, as the Ramban points out. There are times when God announces that something will be done miraculously, and even so, it's done in a way to minimize the miracle. At least to minimize the miracle in psychological terms and in emotional terms. God says to Noach, there's going to be a flood to destroy the whole world. Build a boat. Build a boat. So, Rashi says, does God need a boat to save God? What does he need a boat for? Rashi's answer is, so people will notice him building the boat, and they'll ask him what he's doing, and he'll tell them I'm building a boat because a flood is coming. Maybe they'll think twice. Maybe they'll change. The Ramban goes even further and says the boat wasn't big enough. The boat wasn't big enough. You don't need to be a modern biologist classifying tens of thousands of species to figure out the boat wasn't big enough. Nachmanides knew this 900 years ago. And he says, since the whole thing's a miracle anyhow, the boat will hold them anyway. No, if the boat are going to hold them, the boat's going to hold them miraculously anyhow, why use a boat? Why use a boat? Put them in a cloud. Put them in a force field capsule and let them survive that way. The answer is that you have to do something. You have to do something. It's not enough that the miracle is going to occur. You have to do something to contribute. Rav Dester has all explanation of what it is. I don't go into that now, but you have to do something. Another example, which he points out, is that at the end of his life, God says to Moses, look, I told you you're not going to the land of Israel. You're not going in. I'm not changing my mind. There's no way to get out of that. But I want you to see the whole of the land of Israel. Climb this mountain. You'll see Israel from there, and then you'll die. Okay, now, between you and me, fellas, there's no mountain from which you can see the whole of the land of Israel. It's just not possible. It's too big. So that means he's going to have a vision. If he's going to have a vision, he can have a vision on the plains. You don't have to climb the mountain to have a vision. A vision is a miracle. Indeed, he could have had the vision at night. No, but you have to do something. You have to do something. You have to contribute to it. You don't just sit back and take the miracle. No, you have to make your contribution. The bottom line here is that when God is running the world, even when God announced that there's going to be a miracle, you have to participate. And if he doesn't announce that there's going to be a miracle, then you have to try to do your best to manage the circumstances as best you can. There are exceptions. Abba Chilki in the Gemara. But that is by far the rule that one has to try to manage one's circumstances the best one can. Yes?
Do you think you should put does he put like an obstacle in the way, like for instance, when Moses went to the mountain? Because if God told me to go to a mountain and was going to give me a vision, I would get up to that mountain in a heartbeat. But like, it's not that much of a like, how laborsome is it?
That's an interesting question. I think it will vary from case to case. I don't think it's intrinsically related to this process. I don't have any information that it was hard for Moses to climb the mountain.
Because I'm saying, like, yeah, I mean, like, you don't just get an A in the class without putting...
Okay, I hear where you're coming from. This is the dependent part that I left out. So I'll say a couple of more words. I didn't say why one should make the effort. I mentioned that it was an emotional thing. I didn't say why one should make the effort. So you're making a logical remark that maybe the effort is for the sake of making it more valuable because you put more into it, and then the more difficult it is, the more that would be so. So your argument, your remark is on target. It's just it's not what is intended over here. It's a very reasonable remark. What's intended over here is this. The question is how big the emotional impact of the miracle is. Let's suppose that I'm being charged. There are 10 people who are charging down on me. I have a gun with exactly 10 bullets. They're coming from different directions. It means I have one shot each. I rapidly shoot at each one of them, and every one of them falls. I've hit everyone. Now I know my aim, and I know my reaction time, and I say, come on, I'm not going to get 10 out of 10. It's got to be a miracle. Okay, and that will have an effect. It will definitely have an effect on me. Suppose I have no gun. The 10 are charging down on me, and I say, God, save me! And they all drop dead. is that going to have a bigger effect? Of course it's going to have a bigger effect. Because there, I didn't do anything. Here I shot 10 bullets. I know from experience that the 10 bullets won't all hit, and so on and so on, and they all did hit. That's got to have been organized from heaven. But I shot 10 bullets. And the 10 bullets struck the 10 people, and all of them died. So the emotional impact of the miracle on me is going to be much greater if I don't shoot bullets than it is if I do shoot bullets. The idea of putting in the effort, putting in your own contribution, is to reduce the emotional impact of the miracle. I haven't explained what that's for. That's a much longer story that I can't go into tonight. But that's the idea. It's not a question of earning more merit by putting in more effort. No, it's now. I'm sitting on the plains. There are mountains all around me. You know, I can see maybe a mile and a half because beyond that there are buildings and mountains, everything else. God says you can see the whole of the land of Israel. I have a vision, and I see the whole of the land of Israel on the plains. That's going to be overwhelming. Now I climb a mountain. Everybody knows when you climb a mountain, you can see further. That's what mountains are like. Okay, climb this mountain, you can see 10 miles, 15 miles, 20 miles. God makes it that you see 100 miles. Okay, 100 miles is not 20 miles, no question. But when you climb the mountain, you expect your vision to increase. So it increases more. Then the emotional impact of the vision is much less than if you were sitting in a place where your range of vision was half a mile, and all of a sudden you saw 120 miles. So the idea is to reduce the emotional impact of the miracle. That's the idea. In the case of Jacob, where he has the three-pronged strategy, there the efforts that he makes can hide the miracle entirely. Because as it is, Esau accepts his bribe. You don't see anything obviously miraculous there at all. You tried a strategy, and it worked. That's what it looks on the surface. So there's a common theme, and there's a question of extent, whether you're just reducing the extent of the miracle, or you're covering up the miracle altogether. Yeah, either way. At any rate, all of this means that whatever else you're doing, taking practical control of your circumstances and trying to control the outcome is something that Judaism teaches you to do. If so, what does trust in God mean? Usually, let's say you promise me something, and I say I trust you. If you promise it to me, then I'm not going to make any effort to get it on my own, because you promised it to me, and I trust you. So it's on the table already. It's definitely coming. Why should I waste my time? Right? There, trusting in someone does lead to passivity. Now I tell you, in our case, trusting God doesn't lead to passivity, because, as we saw, even those who trust in God typically are going to make efforts to control the circumstances on their own. So then, what does trusting in God come to? What does it include? And here there are levels. The Chazon Ish starts with basic level, and he says the following. Trust in God means that God is all-powerful. And because God is all-powerful, you never know exactly what's going to happen. Because since God is all-powerful, no matter what your information is, no matter how good your insight or experience is, it could change because God is all-powerful. It means that your picture of the future should be like this. You have a big rectangle and you have various areas. This could happen with 40% probabilities, could happen with 3% probabilities, over and so on. And it's all mapped out. Don't forget to put in a square with a question mark. That one's blank. Because since God is all-powerful, there are alternatives that I haven't thought of, that I can even dream of. And they're also possible. They're also possible. The Talmud expresses this with the following words. Even if the sword is on your neck, and it has started to cut, and you see yourself bleeding, don't give up hope in God's salvation. Because there's that rectangle in the picture of the future with a question mark. You cannot predict the future with certainty at all. You could say what's likely to happen. You could say what you should prepare to try to deal with. But to say, I know what's going to happen, or I even know the range of things that can happen, is a mistake. Because since God is all-powerful, it could radically change in totally unforeseen ways. Now that's a double point. This is going to be typical of the way we deal with trusting in God. It's a double point. Number one is a point in philosophy. Obviously, if God is all-powerful, then the future could change in unexpected ways. But it has an effect on your psychology. There are many books written about people who had unexpected turns of events, and they were so unexpected they couldn't take advantage of them. They were totally unprepared for them. Sometimes you can't even perceive it because you're so overwhelmingly invested in one point of view, you can't even see it when it comes. We had here about, I guess, 15 years ago, a man and his sister-in-law were visiting Israel. This man was a professor of engineering at Cornell, super successful. He came every 6 months, paid for by the Israeli military, to give them advice on their military projects. Sister-in-law was a professor of biology at New York University. They were touring together, came to the yeshiva, and somebody said, why don't you talk to them? Seeing as how I was a professor of philosophy, I guess, even though philosophy is nothing to science, but still. And we talked for about an hour. And at one point, I think the man said, I understand that Judaism thinks women are inferior. So I said to him the following. I said one sentence. There's only one place where the Talmud explicitly compares men's intelligence and women's intelligence, and in that place the Talmud says that women's intelligence is superior. And he says, see that? Always putting down women. So I turned to her and I said, could you repeat my words? And she repeated my words correctly, where I said that one place where the Talmud compares men's and women's intelligence says women's intelligence is superior. I said to him, you are so prejudiced. You're so prejudiced, you couldn't hear what I said. You couldn't hear the words. Your mind was so made up that I had to say one thing, that when I said the opposite words, you couldn't hear them. You couldn't perceive them. As a professor of engineering at Cornell, not exactly stupid, but his prejudice ran so deep, he couldn't hear the words. And it's interesting, he's so prejudiced. She wasn't prejudiced. Not that prejudiced anyway. She heard what I said accurately. Baruch Hashem, because otherwise I'd never been able to prove it to the two of them. But she said it right. So this is what the Chazon Ish is trying to prevent in us. That we shouldn't be so locked into a vision of the future that we can't react to the unexpected when it comes. If you train yourself to think, but God is running the universe, so something totally unexpected can happen. Then when the totally unexpected thing happens, you'll be able to perceive it, register it, recognize it, and deal with it. And that may be very valuable for you. That's the first level of trust. Are we together? Okay. The second level of trust is that whatever happens to me is the best thing that should happen to me. God is always giving me what I need, what's best for me. Of course, God's running the world, and God is good, so of course He's giving me the best for me. As a philosophical point, it's trivial. But again, just like with the Chazon Ish, Rav Dessler, who expands on this at length, is pointing out how you integrate it, how it affects your psychology, your attitudes, how it affects your experience and your practical response. It means everything that happens to me is an opportunity to serve Him, an opportunity to grow spiritually. Those are two descriptions of the same thing. It always has a potential to be realized positively. Always, everything has a potential to be realized positively. And therefore, when something happens, I should look at it as a new potential. Even if, let's say, a person gets sick, and he says, but I can't study Torah. I'm just too dizzy. And I can't go to Dovid the Minyan. I can't. So where's the new potential? Well, the new potential is dealing with sickness. Or the new potential is dealing with my inabilities. Maybe when I'm unable to do the normal thing that unnerves me. I'm undone, as it says in literature. I'm no longer capable of functioning. Well, that's not a good position to be in. There ought to be fallback positions. I don't know if you've ever seen postcards with beautiful paintings, and on the back it says, painted by a quadriplegic with his toes. Quadriplegic is a person who's paralyzed to the extent he can't use his arms or legs. Sometimes he can't make gross motions with his head either. But his toes are okay. Some people, when that happens, it's usually an accident that's a result of that. So some people, they die of despair. They die of despair. I can't run, I can't walk, I can't write, I can't. So my life is over. There's nothing left. This person says, so what can I do? What can I do? I can move my toes. I read about one fellow who became a weather forecaster. He learned to type a computer with his toes, and he reads the satellite photos, and he's a weather forecaster. He asked, what can I do? Not what I can't do, but what I can do. By the way, the famous parable of the glass of water that's half full. So one person says half full, the other person says half. Now let's think. This is how it's boring. What's the truth about that glass of water where one person says it's half full and one person says it's half empty? What's the truth? The truth is that it's both. It really is half full and it really is half empty. It's an identical situation. So when the one says it's half empty, he's right. And when the one says it's half full, he's right. They're both right. But since they're both right, why not choose the upside rather than the downside? Don't choose to look at it that it's half empty, even though that's right. Choose to look at it as half full, because that's also right. And if you look at it as half full, then you give yourself the opportunity to live, to be creative, to do something important. I heard about a fellow many times I went to Johannesburg. But a fellow was paralyzed for the last 5 years of his life. All he could do is, he had control of his face and a little bit of control of his neck. And what they did is they set up an easel with a Talmud, and they gave him a pointer in his mouth, and he could turn the pages this way, and he learned for the last 5 years of his life. Here's a person who's saying, what's left? Not what have I lost, but what's left. That's the idea that whatever God does, he does for the positive, and therefore you can always look for the positive in it. It has a genuine, valuable, positive side. Now, this has many applications which are not exactly obvious. There's a story. The story is told in various ways, but I think the moral is the same. So I'll tell you the way I heard it. There was a family in Europe. The father was an important rabbi. Rabbis and children. They hired a maid to work in the household several weeks before Pesach. Either the maid was non-Jewish, or she came from a very ignorant class. I heard that she was not Jewish. Preparation for Pesach, cleaning the house, cleaning out all the old food. The night before the day of Pesach, night before the day before Pesach, 26 hours before Pesach starts, the Rebbe say, tomorrow morning, the two of us, the adults, are going to be out. The children will be sleeping. And we're going to finish the preparation for our holiday tomorrow. So she's there. She's a live-in maid. And wakes up in the morning, and the father and mother are out. Children are sleeping. And she's cleaning, whatever she's doing. The children wake up. Children wake up, and they're hungry. So she goes to the cupboards where the food is stored, and they are empty. Stuck, clean, scrubbed, polished. There's nothing there. Zero. And the children are hungry. The children start to cry. And she thinks, this is terrible. I have to feed them. So she starts ransacking the house up and down to find some food. In a chest of clothes, at the bottom, she finds a box of crackers. What's a box of crackers doing in a chest of clothes? I'll tell you what it's doing. In Europe, it was customary, and there are some people to this day, where the special matzahs that you use at the Seder to fulfill the biblical commandment of eating matzah are supervised from cutting the wheat in the field to the grinding, to the threshing, to the winnowing, to the grinding, to the baking, and then are protected. And those are the matzahs that you use at the Seder to fulfill the biblical commandment. The rest of the holiday, use other, more ordinary matzahs. These are called matzahs shmuros, or in the singular matzah shmura, and it's protected. And this was this box. They're very valuable. They're very valuable. and they're very rare. Each rabbi would make such a thing for himself and his family, and that's it. She doesn't know that. She was hired several weeks before Pesach. She doesn't know the whole routine of Pesach. The children are crying for food, and she finds these crackers. Oh, wonderful. She feeds the crackers to the children. Fine. The rabbis come home, and the Pesach food starts to arrive, and they fill out the pantry. Oh, terrific. Comes the Seder. Rabbi comes home from shul, says to Rebbetzin, get the matzos, the special shmura matzos. Get the matzos, put them on the table, we'll begin the Seder. She goes to the chest of clothes, opens it up, and it's empty. There's no box of matzah there. She gives what they say in Yiddish, like a shrei. She gives a shriek and says, the matzahs are gone. Matzahs are gone. The father, the mother, the children start ransacking the house, and this poor maid is thinking, what did I do? What did I do? They're going bananas over a box of crackers. This must be awful what I did. It was crackers. But somehow, she says to herself, I know what happened. I can't have them running around like that. So she goes up to the rabbi timidly. She says, I'm awfully sorry. I was at home alone with the children in the morning, and they woke up, and they were hungry, and there wasn't any food, so I went looking for food, and I found the crackers, and I gave them to the children. They ate the crackers. Now, the rabbi said to her, oh, you fed the crackers to the children? Matzahs? Turned to the rabbis and said, get regular matzahs? Let's start the Seder. What happened there? I won't go into detail to tell you what would have happened if it happened to me, but wouldn't have been the same reaction. I would have had a somewhat different reaction. I probably would have been very upset. And so forth and so on. The rabbi's reaction was this. I'm going head first, full speed, to a mitzvah. Not to making money, not to spending a day on the beach and getting a flat tire. No, I'm going to do a mitzvah. A big, important mitzvah. Now I discover that a mistake, an honest mistake made by a maid is costing me this mitzvah. What do I do now? What does God want from me now? One thing he wants from me now is not to make the maid embarrassed. That's what he wants. That's what he wants from me now. He obviously doesn't want that mitzvah of matzah now because that's gone. Okay, don't, as we would say, don't cry over spilt milk. It's gone. So what's the opportunity now? What is there to be accomplished now? This is all organized into the idea that God is running the world, and He's running the world, and He does everything for my best, then this situation is an opportunity to do something valuable. One doesn't think of what's lost, one thinks of what's left and what's available. This also applies to mitzvos. There are people who, for one reason or another, say, this mitzvah isn't right, it doesn't apply, it's out of date, or whatever it is. I'm not speaking about this tonight in detail, but I want to mention a bitter example. Homosexuals who are trying to be religious Jews, some of them take the attitude, well, there are 612 accurate mitzvos. There's one he got wrong. Okay, it's a pretty good score, 612 out of 613, but there's one he got wrong. Obviously, the prohibition against homosexuality is just not realistic, modern, up-to-date, psychological, genetic. It's like 100 reasons why it's inappropriate. And so that is heresy. That's heresy. Such a person cannot be regarded as believing in the Torah or really believing in God's revelation. God's revelation is an all or nothing proposition. Any detail that's rejected as wrong or inappropriate means the person does not accept God and the revelation. If a person says there are 613 commandments, they're all right, they're all true, they're all perfect, but I'm having trouble with one of them, that's fine. Welcome to the club. Everybody's in that club. Everybody's having trouble with this or that. Most of us are having multiple troubles. And we're struggling. Fine, but don't commit intellectual suicide to say that because I'm having trouble, God made a mistake. That's intellectual suicide. So when it comes to the mitzvahs also, the mitzvahs that God gave us are the best thing for us. They're the best thing for us. They're all tied into this idea of providence as what God does for us is the best thing for us. That's two senses of trust. Now there is a third sense, which you mentioned at the beginning, and which I'm finally coming to. I'm believing it for the last because it's very rare, but it's important to know that it exists. We're talking about the concept of trusting God. And that is, Rav Desta deals with this in great detail in two essays which are written back-to-back, printed back-to-back. One is Neis V'Teva, Nature and Miracle, and the other is B'toch HaMishtadlos, Trust and Endeavor. And I would strongly recommend that you read them. We have a principle in the Talmud, Ein Somchan Al Neis. You're not allowed to rely on miracles. That's not always true. Indeed, I would say every principle in the Talmud has exceptions. That doesn't mean there's a mistake. It just means that it doesn't cover all cases. It wasn't meant to cover all cases. And it's not I who am saying it. Rabbi Yochanan says it in the Talmud. In Lamedim in the clothes, Afilu Mokush Shemenem Bar Chutz. That's for the people who know. I don't know, but I'm just saying it's not me speaking. It's Rabbi Yochanan speaking. So it says, Ein Somchan Al Neis, you don't rely on miracles. It doesn't always apply. For example, Medoza, there are two famous stories about him in the Talmud. In his vicinity, there was a road. And a road is some kind of creature that is very highly poisonous. And people were afraid of it, and it was dangerous. They had complained to Rabbi Medoza about it. So he said, show me its hole, where it lives. They took him there, they showed him. He took off his sandal, and he stuck his heel to block the hole. The road became aware that there was no sunlight coming into the hole, and came and bit Rabbi Medoza, and the arod died. The arod died. Not Rabbi Medoza died. So the people picked Rabbi Medoza up on their shoulders, and they carried him back to the shul, to the Beit Knesset, and he said, this is to teach you that not the arod kills, but sin kills. Now that's relying on a miracle. He put his heel on the hole. He knew very well the arod was going to bite him, and yet he relied on a miracle. Here's another case. It was Friday afternoon, and his daughter filled the lamps, and she lit them, and as she lit them, and then she said, Oi, I made a mistake. I put vinegar into the lamps instead of oil. And if you ask, how then did the lamps light? So one of the commentators says, because she was using last week's wicks. And last week's wicks still had oil in them. So the oil in the wicks is burning up, but afterwards, when it absorbs the vinegar, it's going to go out. So the Medoza said, don't worry, he who commanded oil to burn will command vinegar to burn. And that's what happened. And the lamps burned all of Shabbos until Motzei Shabbos, and they made Havdalah from a fire that they lit from those lamps. So here's Rabbi Medoza, and he is relying on miracles. So it's not a problem because, as I told you, the general principles in the Talmud are made to tolerate exceptions. But the question is, what's the lesson? What are we supposed to learn from this? And what Rav Desta says is this. Nature, laws of nature, patterns in what happened, are just a veneer to create a psychological impression. Really, everything's being done by God. Everything short of free human decisions, everything that happens in the world, being done by God. But he does it in a repetitive, categorized way, so that it will look as if it's an automatically operating machine. It will look as if he's not doing it. God wants us to deal with that illusion. He wants to deal with it and penetrate it and overcome it. And again, this is the third time I'm making this point. It's the same consistent idea. Not only overcome it intellectually, for intellectual people, that's fairly simple. Oh, it's only illusion. Okay, I'll mark that on my notebook and I'll remember. When the test comes up, I'll write, is it illusion or real? I'll write down illusion because I'll remember it. That's trivial. No, the question is, can you experience the world that way? Can you feel it to be God's production? How would that show? Well, one way it would show is this. Think of Rabbi Medoza's words again. He didn't say, God will do a miracle and make the vinegar burn. He didn't say that. He said, he who commanded the oil to burn will command the vinegar to burn. That means when I, Rabbi Medoza, see oil burning, and when I see vinegar burning, it's the same. I don't feel anything different. I'm not surprised or shocked. I'm not amazed. Because The oil burning is just as much God's direct activity as the vinegar burning would be. I see God's hand directly involved in both. When a person gets to the point where he understands, sees, and feels God's hand in the repetitive, categorized events in the world, then there's no need for the illusion anymore. And such a person can command miracles and lose nothing, because he's passed the test. The test being the emotional test of experiencing the world. I use a word now, but it's suggestive, but it needs careful definition. I'm not going to do it tonight unless you press me. He experiences the world as continuous miracle. If you experience the world as a continuous miracle, then what do I care whether it's repetitive miracles or miracles that break the patterns? It's all the same thing. It's all God directly doing it. Such a person can command miracles. And that's the third sense of bitachon. The third sense of bitachon is to feel that everything is done directly by God. That's to rely on the fact that He's doing everything directly. And such a person can command miracles. That's what Medoza did. And if you ask, which you should ask, but then Jacob and Samuel, weren't they, surely their levels far surpassed the Medoza? The answer is, yes, it did. And they could have commanded miracles also. They could have, but they had an interest in not doing so. One interest they had in not doing so was to guard against pride. And the other interest is part of what Rav Dessler writes there, that when you're in the illusion and you're in the process of overcoming the illusion, you're spiritually very creative. When you step beyond the illusion, you're already on the plateau, you're already on the platform. So then you're there. And sometimes the great tzaddik will step back into the illusion so as to be able to engage again in conquering the illusion. Those are the two reasons that he gives. But we now ended up with three definitions of providence. All three, it's crucial that you have both the intellectual understanding and the quality of experience. Otherwise, you don't have the trust in God. Trust in God is essentially a quality of experience, together with the belief. We're not talking about taking a Lorivan, a tranquilizer. But it's the belief expressed as a quality of experience. The first was that God is all-powerful, and therefore nothing's sealed as far as the future is concerned. The second is that whatever God does is the best for you. You should look for the opportunity in it to serve God and to grow spiritually. And the third is that ultimately everything that happens is happening directly through God. To see and experience God's activity in everything that happens, and such a person can even command miracles. Yeah.
What's science?
Science is just a deeper and more detailed description of the patterns of the events that are taking place. That's all. When you do, Rav Dessler has a whole essay on this. In Neis V'Teva, he talks about this. The information you get in science is just more about the pattern, but it's not qualitatively different information than just the pattern. When you get down to the bottom, what do they tell you? Well, electrons are negatively charged, so when you try to put them together, they repel one another. That's what they do. That's their pattern. That's the electron pattern. Why did they do that? Don't know. In the laboratory, they repel one another, so that's what they do. All they tell you is what they do. So you get more and more detailed information about what happens. It's valuable, it's important, but it doesn't get you beyond the category of the patterns that are happening.
Do you have to go through a phase before? So you said that, to them it wasn't amazing that the oil, that the fire burnt the vinegar and the oil, but do you think you have to go through a phase of wow, this is so amazing that God does this and this? And then
I think it's unavoidable. I think it's absolutely unavoidable because as a child, your ability to operate in the world depends upon the patterns. So that's the hot water tap. I'll remember that, because that's the way I'll know when I get hot water, when I get cold water, and that's how you tie your shoes. So my shoes won't be untied 10 minutes later and trip and fall on them. No, you tie them this way and they stay tied. He wants to know the patterns. The patterns become extremely important psychologically. You come to depend upon them. It takes a great effort afterwards to outgrow them and to see them for what they really are, and then to experience them for what they really are. The vast, vast majority of people don't get to the level of a Medoza. They don't end up experiencing the world as continuous miracle. I included it because it's part of the concept. So I think you're right. It's unavoidable to go through the first stage, And then you struggle with, and it's, by the way, it's not an all or nothing proposition either. It can be done by degrees. Sometimes you have it more than other times, you know. Okay?
Yeah, I just saw a tree. I don't know if it's true or not, but I saw on the internet, it was like it could grow 7 different types of fruit. I was just like, I don't know if it's true or not, but
I wouldn't be prejudiced one way or the other.
yeah, exactly. It didn't matter.
I wouldn't be prejudiced, and by the way, maybe they grafted it.
Yeah, it's true. But either way, though, I was just like, wow, like that's just amazing that God could do such a thing.
Yeah, but if they grafted it, it's a different story altogether, right? Nectarines are a graft, right? So you have a peach tree that grows peaches and it grows nectarines because somebody grafted onto the thing, whatever it is that makes nectarines, and he grafted something else on and made another combination, right? I mean, I'm skeptical about these.
Yeah, I would be skeptical.
But I would never say it's impossible. I would never say. Okay.